Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, derbiologist, and joining me again is co-host Capping with Candace. Candace here. Candace, this week we're going to kind of go across the country, a sprint, and then we've got a turf race, and then we've got an older race out on the West Coast. But let's start at Churchill Downs, the Aristides sprint race, but it drew the defending Breeders' Cup Sprint champion in for his first race of the year.
It did, and of the three races we're going to talk about today, this is maybe the one that I thought was about the least competitive of these. Like you said, Work All Week shows up here, having won the Breeders' Cup in his last start. He hasn't ran since, so it's been a little over 200 days, so we'll see how he performs coming off the long layoff. He's ran well off of layoffs in the past. He is a horse who I think has been a little bit touchy in that he typically has long breaks in between runs, so coming in here off of pretty long break isn't something that's completely unknown to him. I'm going to pick him here just because I really think he's kind of lone speed in this spot. There are some other horses in here who do well over this distance, but they tend to come from a little more off the pace, and if he's not going to be pressured out front, I think he's just about as good as gone. The other horse who probably will take money, because he typically does, is Gentleman's Bet, but I don't think he's the same horse he was last year. He's come out now a few times this year and has really struggled. It's kind of easy to make excuses for last time because that was over 7 furlongs and he had a lot of trouble. But the start before that was over 6, and he really just didn't show up at all. So he would be one who, if you were playing kind of your exactas or tries and keying Work All Week on top, I would kind of suggest to not put Gentleman's Bet in there and just kind of hope he finishes outside the top 3, which I think is pretty possible in this spot. And maybe the other horse of any interest is Aristides. He breaks from the rail. He's won 2 in a row. I don't think he's quite good enough to beat Work All Week unless Work All Week doesn't run to his form here. But he is one who can get in there for second or third. So I'm going to go Work All Week on top and saying keep Gentleman's Bet out of your exactas and tries.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the trick of the race is kind of trying to figure out who might fire one of their better efforts and then determining if Work All Week is ready to fire his A game off the bench. Now, I agree that he probably doesn't need his 100 speed figure off the bench to win this race. Probably a lower 90s effort will get it done. I thought last year Work All Week was managed expertly. I think this was an example of a horse that I've always said, I just think wins build confidence. And if they would have stuck this horse in a grade 1 any time in last June or July, he would have lost. But I think they just kept on putting him up the ladder, putting him in spots he could win. And then I don't think his Breeders' Sprint race was a fluke. He was at the top of his game, and he shipped well, and he kind of ran them off their feet. So I'm not sure where he really fits at this point. So I'm going to kind of go against him here. I agree with you. Gentleman's Bet is kind of tough, although he has fired a good race in the past at Churchill Downs. I ended up going with Viva Majorca. Coming off the pace, I think Elsvid can set the pace. Actually, I think Elsvid's a pretty hard-knocking horse, and he's one of the horses that kind of give a gauge of this race. If he's on the lead coming around the turn or loses by a hard-fought neck, then they probably win a little bit slower. If he's beaten soundly by 2-3 lengths, then that means race will probably get a pretty good speed figure. But I think kind of Viva Majorca, who's ran some good races at Churchill, can come off the pace. Maybe we get a little bit of a softened up and not cranked up Work All Week. But I do think it's a good spot because if Work All Week can kind of progress like last year, I think he'll be sitting in the same spot as last year. And this year, the Breeders' Cup is at Keeneland. So I think it's a solid race. What do you think about the horse that from Louisiana that kind of woke up the last time, Nate's Mineshaft, to win against Private Zone, who's going to be running in the Penn Mile next?
I just don't know if this is exactly his game. I think the 7 furlongs is more suitable to him, even maybe a mile. He's just one that, aside from that race over at Churchill Downs against Private Zone, I just don't see that he's good enough against these. He's kind of failed a few times before that in allowance races over this distance, and to be honest, the Churchill Downs race, I think it's a little bit deceiving because we had a few horses in there, probably most notably Bayern, who didn't run to form, so it's a little bit tough to kind of judge how well he really ran or if he was just better than some horses who weren't at their typical level that day.
I'm kind of thinking he regresses a little bit off that effort. A couple horses didn't show up, and he just, like you say, kind of at 7 furlongs, a little bit older like that, just a better race for him than a hard, all the way around effort in a 6 furlong race requires. Let's go out west, Santa Anita, the Californian. This is a grade 2, and we're getting a couple of horses kind of freshened after some mini layoffs. And I thought, the pace dilemma, and we've got a few horses going up in class, and then, a couple of horses kind of sitting right where they've won last at a grade 2, a solid race.
I think it's a very solid race. I think it's a very competitive race. Moreno comes in here after having won at Charlestown. He has every right to win this race. He would be the class of this field. But I'll play against just because his race before Charlestown was very, very bad. And I do think he loves that Charlestown track now. It's a couple years in a row now that he has really run well there. I think he's just one of this kind of a horse for the course type of guy there. So I'd play against him coming back out here to Santa Anita, where he's won respectably but hasn't quite got the job done before. Big Casanova's intriguing from the rail because he has speed, and he's kind of a key to this race, I think, in softening up Moreno out front. My issue with Big Casanova is that all of his big races have come over the Del Mar synthetic, which doesn't exist anymore. The same can kind of be said for Blue Tone, though Blue Tone has done a little bit of something away from Del Mar, but I see both of them as horses who last year really relished that synthetic surface, and they just haven't really run quite to that level over the dirt. I ended up going with Catch a Flight here. I thought he ran a really nice race last time out. This seems to be a horse who's kind of getting better and better with every race that he runs out here. Ran very respectably in the Santa Anita Handicap. He was third behind Share Belief and Moreno. And if we're going to be honest, only 4.25 lengths behind Share Belief. That type of form is probably just about good enough to get it done here. Even Moreno only beat him by a head, and I think you're going to get a much bigger price on him than you're going to get on Moreno. So I'm going to bank that here, 1.125 with Moreno coming off a hard victory. I think I'm going to bank that Catch a Flight can reverse that form here. And like I said, I really liked his race last time out, kind of a stalking trip, and just kind of made his room move right around the far turn. And I think that type of a trip can get it done in this sort of a spot too, with a little bit of speed signed on.
Yeah, I saw the 2 speed horses. You've got Moreno and then Big Casanova at the rail. And Big Casanova has run his best races on synthetic. And it seems like, he kind of pairs up efforts and then he regresses, although he does have a good work tab coming off the layoff. So I think he's going to be fresh and probably sent from the rail. Now, Moreno, what's interesting about him, I agree with a lot of your assessments. I think he likes the bull ring. He kind of, I've always, with him, his lifetime win record is 4 for 26. And a horse like that is just hard to take at even money coming off a win, although he drops a little bit in class. Now, one thing I think people are going to bring up, probably more if he loses. I don't really think it's a factor in why I'm not picking him, but it is interesting that he's 0 for 8 at Santa Anita. Now, a lot of people don't remember, before he went out to New York and broke his maiden a couple of years ago, he had ran in some tough maiden special weight races. And then, of course, he had the loss last fall at Santa Anita, but he was hammered out of the gate. So his record, like, sometimes stats tell a lot, but, I'm not really sure what that 0 for 8 means because he's got 4 second-place finishes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've said the same thing. Some people were already talking about it, how he hasn't quite got the job done at Santa Anita. But, again, I kind of see what you see. He had some trouble in those trips. I think a lot of those races were very, very classy races with horses like Share Belief, Game On Dude. So he was going against some of the best in the best, which this race clearly is not. So I don't think it's the surface. I think it's maybe a little bit more circumstantial. So.
Yeah, I ended up going with Catch a Flight as well. I think he sets a perfect trip here. I really like this race out of that outside post when he ran against Shared Belief. He really tried really hard, even after Shared Belief really turned on the turbojets on the turn there. A lot of horses would have faded back to 4th or 5th, and he kind of just held steady down the lane and then was outbobbed by Moreno late for 2nd, so he ended up 3rd. Then the last race he closed. I mean, I think they're really eyeing some of the big grade 1s this summer out west, so I think this is a logical step up in class. Mandela knows how to work out Argentinian horses very well, and Gary Stevens jumps back on him. A horse that I'm really anti against is Hard Aces. I do notice he gets the blinkers on, and he may show a little bit more speed. That's another reason to maybe not back Marino in this race. So I guess I like Catch a Flight, and then I do think off that sharp work tab and at the rail, I do think Big Casanova can be considered in a few tickets. I do think Sammy Mandeville, that last race when he closed was for real, and I could see him getting part of the purse in this race, second, third, fourth as well.
Yeah, to be honest, him and Catch a Flight are kind of the ones that I would plan on using together in some spots. Coming off that last race, I liked how they both looked in there, and I do think that some of the favorites here are a little bit vulnerable, with Moreno coming off the hard win and kind of some of the things we said about him coming here after winning at Charlestown. Big Casanova I like as a horse, and he'd be the other one I would throw into exactas with Catch a Flight and Sammy Mandeville. Um, it's a little tough to pick him to win just because he hasn't shown that same form over the dirt, but it's not. I think a lot of his races, and I think you would agree, we've talked about this before, but a lot of his races are a little bit deceiving, and I still go back to last year when he ran the Jockey Club Gold Cup, and he looked like he was traveling beautifully up the rail, looked like he had every right to be in it, and was just completely eased, and it was one of the strangest things, and struggled next time out after that, and it seemed like getting him back over at Del Mar with a synthetic. I was there that day, and he was phenomenal that day. And even his San Pasqual wasn't awful in a race where there was a little bit of speed and a classy horse and that opportunity. So I think that, he's shown flashes of talent, and we just haven't quite seen him put it all together on the dirt yet like he can on the synthetic, but at the price you're probably going to get, I think he's worth throwing into exactas.
Yeah, I think those are pretty much the same three that I have. Catch a Flight. I'm going to go with Big Casanova second and Sammy Mandeville, but I think Sammy's definitely usable in trifectas, and I'm really not expecting a big effort from Marino just because I think he's one of those in and outer horses, and this may really be his kind of his prep for the Hollywood Gold Cup this summer. So should be a good race, and then I really think if Catch a Flight wins, then I think he's kind of in that upper tier of horses that really fits as one of the top 10 or 12 older horses the rest of the summer. So should be a good race. Penn Mile, third year they're running this, $500,000 on the turf. Last year we ended up seeing Bobby's Kitten run in this race, and I think we've got some talent in this year's field.
I think we do. We have a nice large field, which, if I remember right, I thought the field last year was pretty small, but it was a nice field. But so this one we have a nice 11 horse field. Ocho 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 comes over here after having ran in the Kentucky Derby. I'm pretty against him in the spot. To be honest, of some of the horses who have been running and ran in the Derby, he was one who I think maybe needed a break more than anyone else. You could see in some of his workouts he looked pretty sore. So I'm a little bit worried about him coming back now here so quickly after the Derby. The switch to turf is interesting but a little suspect. The mile distance, I think, is probably perfect for him at this point. I know his best runs have come in sprints, but I think they've gotten him to relax to a point that he's not really a sprinter anymore. He doesn't have that kind of lethal front-end speed that he, at one point in his career, had pretty much as a 2-year-old. So it's an interesting spot for him, but I'm against him. I do think there's other speed in this race as well, most notably from Granny's Kitten, who has shown some speed in a few of his runs and breaks from the rail. I think he'll be sent there pretty aggressively. Papa's Cool even has shown speed at times, though maybe not quite as much as Ocho Ocho Ocho, but he'll be right there pushing them along. I thought this was a competitive race and a race with a lot of prices. I would expect that, at post time, that the pretty heavy favorite would be Night Prowler. People will probably recognize Devisidero in his form, who was very impressive on the Churchill Downs undercard. They'll also see a lot, who's been really nice as well. So I think with so many recognizable names in his form and coming off that wind over at Keeneland, that Night Prowler will take a lot of play in here. I'm not completely against him. I think he can certainly win this race, and I think he'll get a nice setup because there is so much speed sight on here. I just always kind of worry a little bit about a deep closer in a big field at a short price. I think you have to work out that trip. So I'm going to kind of take a stand against here of him with him on the cut back a little bit. I ended up going with Comanche Storm. He's been running down at Gulfstream, and I think he finally kind of found a home. His last couple starts, he was claimed and was running now over a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream, and seems to have really woken up. I thought his last race in particular in the English Channel was very impressive. He was broke like a half step slow and was squeezed out of the gate, and really kind of had to find his way to settle in, lost some ground at one point, and ended up coming around really wide and just missed by a neck. And I thought there was about 2 or 3 times that he had to kind of regather himself and put in another effort, and he was down to do it every single time. Showed some greenness there as well, so I think he's eligible to improve with some experience under his belt. On numbers wise, he completely fits in this spot. He just hasn't quite ran at a race of this class level, so it'll be a little bit of an acid test. But at 15 to 1 on the morning line, I'm more than willing to find out how good he really is. He's drawn well in the 5 spot. I think he'll get kind of a nice mid-pack run, and he'll get that first run over horses like Night Prowler. So we can kind of see if he can luck into a little bit of a trip here. But I was surprised to see his morning line as high as it was, because, like I said, on the numbers, he completely fits.
Yeah, the $500,000 purse and then the distance of a mile kind of brings together. You've got your class horses, and then you've got some horses where, like, I think that's why Ocho's in here, because of the mile distance. But I agree with you. I just think this is a bad spot for him. He's kind of dulled his speed a little bit. He does have some turf breeding, but I'm just not sure that he has enough speed to kind of break loose from the pack. Yet, I'm not, if he could get a good trip, because he might get first jump on some of these deeper closers. This race is always interesting because it's run at night. It's not dark. They don't have lights. I mean, they have the lights, but they run this earlier on the card. And so I noticed in the past, sometimes horses that run at the rail can do well. So I'm looking for a horse to get an inside trip. I thought Woodwind W, showed enough speed last time that I think he'll keep the pace on us in here. 2 horses that were in my stable mail, both of them Papa Cool, and Granny's Kitten really exploded with big turf wins the last time. And actually, Papa Cool has gotten back-to-back nice turf wins. I'm going to go with Granny's Kitten just because that race last time off the layoff was so good at a mile and 8. Now he gets to cut back to a mile. He's undefeated. He won at 6 furlongs. These connections won this race. They do well on the turf. It's another Kitten. And then, even the mares produce some nice horses. So I went with Granny's Kitten, but I really think Papa Cool has impressed me with his turf races. And on the cutback, he can be pretty tough in this spot.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of take a stand against Papa Cool, not because he hasn't looked nice over at Santa Anita, but because I tend to think that the California turf races, for the most part, aren't quite up to the same caliber of some of the races on the East Coast, particularly those from Gulfstream. So I tend, at this point in the year with these 3-year-olds, to weight that form a little bit heavier, which is why I went with Comanche Storm to win. Another one who I wanted to mention was High Noon Rider, who we saw him kind of along the Triple Crown Trail in some of the races down in Florida, ran in the Isla Morada, which Materiality won there, and Stanford finished second. Both of them went over to the Derby. And then, when that didn't work out, they started putting him back on the turf, and he ran a nice race to be second to Force the Pass over at Gulfstream, was really closing late. That was over a mile. And then won, lost him out over 7.5 furlongs in an allowance. I think he has a horse who's shown he fits in this sort of a spot. And another one who, at 15 to 1, I think looks a great price. So for me, this is a race where I'm really trying to kind of play some of these priced horses in here who, it seems like because the size in the field and because we have a couple names, there's some horses in here that, really are kind of overs. Even another one who I'd mention is My Point Exactly, who was a pretty nice 2-year-old on the turf, broke his maiden on the turf and ran in the stakes over in Louisiana, and then, came to Gulfstream and they tried him on the dirt in the Florida Derby. That was a little bit maybe too much too soon, but then ran 3rd on the dirt behind Mr. Jordan, who I know is a horse you think pretty highly of. So I think he's shown that he has some class, and the switch back to turf, I think, can only be a good thing for him. So My Point Exactly, another one, 15 to 1. So I'm looking to really kind of go bombs away in this sort of a race.
Yeah, I think New Rider is one of those horses that he doesn't have a name. All of a sudden, his speed figure pops up by 17 points in that last race. Um, as you mentioned, he's running some of those Gulfstream Park turf races. Although he ran ones that were more this spring when a lot of the good turf horses or turf bred horses may have left. But
Yeah.
the speed figure puts him in there, and he doesn't have the high profile name. And I think you're right. He's going to be the type of horse that's 15, 16, 17 to 1 in all the pools. He's going to play long in the exactas. So that may not be actually the horse that chased home um, Woodwind W the last time. Forced the pass. I think he even might drift up a little bit. And I was more impressed with his close against the winner in that race.
Yeah, and he's one too that he beat High Noon Rider two back, so he's one who has some form with these guys. So you can kind of see where he slots in, and one who I think has really relished this mile distance. I guess maybe the only concern I would have for him is that he tends to run pretty forwardly, and again with me, I'm kind of expecting this to be pretty fast early on, so he would kind of have to work something out, maybe lay back a little bit further than they have with him before. But typically when he wins, he's within maybe 2 lengths from the lead at the first call, and I just think that they might go a little bit quick for him.
Should be a fast race, and I hope that the rain stays away and the field stays intact because I really do think it's got a good mixture of speed and it's got some pressers and then it's got a couple of the deeper closers. I think there's 3 or 4 horses that if they win this race, I think you could expect to see them winning some big turf races this summer and maybe even be able to take on some of those older horses later on this year, just because, as we've talked about, some of these older turf horses that are distance horses, they're not 4 and 5. They seem to be 6 and 7 and 8, and we need some new blood in there. And so I'm hoping that maybe some of these 3-year-olds can stretch out in distance and do well. And I think Bolo is running Friday on the turf at Santa Anita,
Yeah.
getting ready for the Belmont Derby, and a couple other horses will be coming back off layoff. So hopefully we'll kind of fill in that turf division, which is, as we heard today, Wise Dan is going to resume galloping. So we know he's going to maybe possibly be back this fall as well. So this is a week we've got the Californian, the Penn Mile, and then the Aristides. And then next week we come back. We'll be taking a look at the Belmont Stakes, also the Met Mile and the Woody Stevens. So it should be another good weekend of racing next week. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire.